Do not stain this ballroom with your presence. The words cracked across the marble like a whip, silencing the orchestra mid-note. They came from Richard Hale, master of ceremonies, his silver hair glowing under the chandelier, his hand raised as if banishing a shadow. Guests turned in unison, their smiles freezing into smirks, their curiosity curdling into judgment. At the foot of the staircase stood a black woman in a gown of midnight satin. No glitter, no diamonds, no attempt to mirror the excess of the room. She carried only herself, steady, unshaken, and a crimson portfolio clutched in her hand, its color loud against her quiet form. Whispers ignited like sparks. She cannot possibly be a guest. Who let her through the entrance? What is she hiding in that folder? Still, she remained silent. Her stillness was heavier than any insult, her eyes steady as if she had heard the same words before, too many times to count. Richard descended a single step. "This evening is reserved for legacy," he declared, his voice swelling with pride. "Not for intruders desperate for attention." His eyes never left her, daring her to respond. From the far side of the room, a cameraman shifted his lens. The tally light blinked red, capturing every flicker of disdain on Richard's face, every ounce of calm in hers. Into his microphone he whispered, barely audible, "They have no idea who she island." Ho! The words were recorded, though the crowd did not hear them. Near the champagne tower, a young waiter faltered. His tray wobbled, glasses rattled. For the briefest second, recognition crossed his face. He almost spoke. Then fear sealed his lips. Only she noticed. Laughter swelled as a man in a tailored navy suit raised his voice. "Show us your proof, darling, or admit you slipped past the door." His taunt spilled into applause, the cruelty rehearsed, polished, normalized. She did not flinch. Her thumb brushed the edge of the crimson portfolio, slow, deliberate, as if preparing to open a door none of them wanted opened. Security began to move. The crowd leaned closer, savoring the spectacle. Richard lifted his chin, satisfied. But from the corner, a masked guest muttered into his drink, "I have seen her before, but where?" The orchestra did not return. The night had shifted. The ballroom was no longer a celebration, it had become a trial, and the verdict was not yet written. Lie. The laughter that had swelled moments earlier began to fracture, replaced by uneasy murmurs. The crimson portfolio in her hand was no longer just a folder. It had become a question, and questions spread quickly in rooms built on appearances. Richard Hale forced a smile, his voice dripping with condescension. "You see, she will not even open it. That is because there is nothing inside. She came here with paper and pretense." He gestured broadly, feeding the crowd's hunger for mockery. But her eyes never left him, calm, studying, as if his words were already catalogued and archived for a moment still to come. The cameraman zoomed tighter, the red tally light steady. His microphone caught whispers rippling across the tables. What if she really was invited? Impossible. Look at her. 2R. Then why does she not leave? At the edge of the room, the young waiter who had faltered earlier took one hesitant step forward. His lips parted, but again fear locked them. He shifted his tray, glasses clinking like tiny bells of hesitation. She caught his glance once more, the faintest nod passing between them. Recognition was not gone. It was waiting. Richard descended further, his voice booming now. "This is an insult to every partner present. Security, remove her." Tudel, the guards hesitated, not because they doubted him, but because her stillness unsettled them. She did not plead, did not argue. Instead, she lifted the portfolio a fraction higher, enough for the crowd to see the embossed seal pressed into the leather. The gold imprint gleamed beneath the chandelier, a corporate insignia every executive in the room should have recognized. A ripple of gasps. One guest leaned closer to another. "That emblem, it belongs to the investment group, but why is it in her hands?" The words hung uncertain, unverified. The cameraman whispered again, louder this time. "I told you, they have no idea who she island." The microphone caught it. The feed transmitted silently beyond the walls. Richard's smile faltered. For the first time, his certainty cracked. Emblems can be forged, he spat quickly. Paper can be faked. Yet his voice lacked the force of his first insult. From the corner, the masked guest raised his glass. His voice low but firm. "I have seen her across a boardroom table, years ago." His admission scattered the whispers into chaos. Half the room demanded proof. The other half leaned in, anxious, sensing that the night was tilting. She said nothing. She let the crowd battle itself, her silence more commanding than any rebuttal. Only her thumb traced the seal, slow, deliberate, as if she was measuring time. The orchestra had not returned. The only music was the sound of shuffling feet, shifting glasses, and the quiet hum of the cameras recording history without warning. And just as Richard raised his voice to reclaim the room, she lifted the portfolio an inch higher, the corner of a document sliding into view, a glimpse of black ink signatures, bold against white paper, enough to ignite speculation, not enough to confirm. Gasps again. Someone shouted, "Is that a contract?" Another, "No, it cannot be. Why would she carry it here?" She closed the folder before the questions could multiply. One move, simple yet final. The crowd leaned forward, starved, desperate. Her eyes swept the room once. Calm, certain, measuring every face that had laughed, doubted, mocked. She did not speak. She did not need to. The weight of unanswered questions pressed harder than any speech could. And then she turned her gaze back to Richard Hale. Her voice, low and steady, cut through the chaos. "You demanded proof. You will receive it. But not yet." The crowd shivered. Security froze mid-step. The portfolio remained sealed, the truth postponed. The trial of this ballroom was only beginning. Medio. The ballroom no longer buzzed with laughter. It trembled with division. Half the room whispered doubts. The other half demanded her removal. The crimson portfolio gleamed faintly under the chandelier, a silent challenge that unsettled even those who mocked her. Richard Hale straightened his shoulders, voice slicing through the noise. "Do not be deceived by seals or signatures. This is a celebration of truth, and the truth is that she does not belong here." He gestured sharply. Security advanced, their polished shoes striking the marble in unison. She remained still. The portfolio rested firmly in her grasp, her thumb pressing against the embossed seal as though it were a trigger. Her eyes lifted briefly, not at Richard, but at the young waiter near the champagne tower. His tray trembled again, and this time his lips formed a single word without sound. "Carter." The cameraman caught it. His lens stayed tight on her face, but the microphone clipped the faint whisper from the waiter. He replayed it silently to himself. Carter. The name echoed against something he had heard before, a name not yet spoken aloud in this hall. Richard's patience fractured. "Enough of this charade. Remove her now." His voice cracked, too forceful, too desperate. The cracks were showing. The masked guest stepped forward, voice steady. "Years ago, I saw that portfolio in a boardroom. It was not a forgery then." He stopped short, as if restraining more truth. The crowd erupted, some demanding details, others dismissing him outright. She lifted her chin slightly. Her voice finally cut through the uproar, low and deliberate. "Proof has a time, and that time has not yet arrived." Her words did not shout. They resonated, like a bell struck deep. Security hesitated mid-step, uncertain whether to obey Hale or the invisible weight of her presence. One guest at the front muttered nervously, "What if she really is who they say?" His companion snapped back. "Who says? Nobody has said anything." The confusion deepened, questions multiplying faster than answers. The portfolio shifted in her hand, a corner of the first page sliding further into view. A headline printed in bold letters flashed for a second before she closed it again. The few who caught it gasped. Richard moved closer, furious now. "Show them or leave." Her reply was colder than silence. "You will not dictate the moment of truth." The room froze. For the first time, Richard looked uncertain. The crowd sensed it. And in that fragile pause, the cameraman whispered again, louder this time. "The story is writing itself." Dot. The marble floor echoed with the measured steps of security, their shoulders squared, their eyes fixed on her as though she were an intruder who had to be erased. The ballroom, once a celebration, had become a stage for confrontation. Richard Hale's voice cracked as he barked, "Escort her out. She has tested our patience long enough." He lifted his hand like a judge delivering a sentence. The black woman did not move. The crimson portfolio remained steady in her grasp. Her silence pressed heavier than any shout. From the corner, the cameraman adjusted his stance, raising the camera higher. This time he spoke not in whispers, but loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "The world is watching. Every second is live." Phones began to rise across the room. Guests who moments earlier had laughed now aimed their screens, recording. The atmosphere shifted from private insult to public evidence. The young waiter by the champagne tower trembled again, but his voice finally slipped through his fear. Barely audible, he repeated the name, Carter. The sound reached the masked guest, who froze mid-gesture, recognition sharpening in his eyes. He lowered his glass slowly, as though the weight of realization was too heavy to hold. Richard's command wavered. "Remove her," he said again, but softer, his authority eroding under the gaze of dozens of lenses. One of the guards reached forward. His fingers hovered inches from her arm. Before contact could be made, she spoke for the second time that night. Her voice was calm, measured, but it carried through the hall with the clarity of a verdict. "Touch me, and you will carry the cost." The guard hesitated. His hand dropped. He did not understand why, only that the conviction in her tone outweighed Hale's command. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The cameraman zoomed closer, catching every line of composure on her face. Across the hall, murmurs grew louder. "Who is Carter? Why does that name matter?" The crimson portfolio shifted again, a corner sliding open just enough to reveal not only signatures but also the crest of the investment consortium itself, stamped in ink. A few in the crowd recognized it immediately, their eyes widening. But before the revelation could solidify, she closed it once more. The truth remained sealed. Richard paled. His voice shook now. "This is still a fraud. None of this proves she belongs here." Her reply was steady. "Belonging is not yours to grant." The ballroom erupted again, divided louder than before. Some shouted for proof, others demanded silence, and more than a few turned their phones directly toward Richard instead of her. For the first time, he looked unsettled, trapped in the glare of both chandeliers and camera lights. And she stood unmoved, her silence daring them to wait for what was still to come. "Dow." Richard Hale's voice strained, louder than before, but stripped of confidence. "This spectacle is a distraction. She is a fraud, and anyone recording will be removed as well." His hand trembled as he pointed at the crowd, but the command rang hollow. The guests no longer obeyed him. Phones remained raised, lenses unblinking. Some guests leaned closer, whispering fiercely, while others stood back, unease etched into their posture. The ballroom had become a court of opinion, and Hale was losing control. The black woman did not move. Her eyes swept calmly over the divided room. She raised the crimson portfolio a fraction higher, letting the embossed crest catch the chandelier's glow once more. For a split second, the crowd glimpsed a bold heading at the top of the page inside, "Strategic Expansion Proposal." Gasps rippled instantly, then fell silent as she closed the folder again, offering no confirmation. A man in the second row shouted, "If that is real, then she is not just a guest." Another responded, "It could still be forged. Why will she not prove it?" The questions tangled like wires, sparking louder and sharper. The young waiter clutched his tray against his chest now, whispering the name again, firmer this time, "Carter." The masked guest lowered his glass completely. His voice carried across the hall. "Yes, that is the name I remember, Carter." His tone was final, but the details remained locked away, his recognition unfinished. The cameraman moved closer, lens tight on her expression. Into his microphone, he declared, "Every moment is live. This is no longer their secret." His words emboldened the room. Murmurs became open debate. Richard's facade cracked. "Enough!" he roared, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Sweat glistened under the light, his hand gripping the railing as though it could anchor him. And then, for the first time, she stepped forward. Just one pace, but it shattered the stalemate. Her voice, steady and cold, filled the space. "You demanded proof on your terms. You will receive it on mine." Her words echoed, heavy with promise. The crowd leaned forward as if pulled by a single thread. But she did not open the portfolio. She let silence hang, a silence thicker than music, forcing everyone to wait. Richard's jaw tightened. His power was unraveling. Thread by thread, the night was no longer his. Richard Hale's face burned crimson as the room slipped further from his grasp. He slammed his fist against the table, rattling silverware and crystal. "Enough of this, theater! You are nothing but a trespasser with a stolen name. I will not allow this insult to stand." His shout reverberated through the chandeliers, but the authority behind it was crumbling. Guests no longer obeyed silence. Some lifted their phones higher, filming openly, while others muttered nervously. The ballroom was no longer his stage. The black woman stood motionless, her portfolio pressed firmly to her chest. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not at Richard, but at the security guards who still hovered near. She spoke clearly, every word deliberate. "If you remove me, you erase the very deal this celebration was built upon." Murmurs surged through the crowd like a rising tide. Someone whispered, "What deal?" Another asked, "Is she connected to the expansion rumors?" The tension coiled tighter. The masked guest stepped forward, voice stronger now. "I have seen that seal before, not in rumor but in contract. Years ago, across a boardroom table, signed by names every one of you would recognize." His words sent a shockwave through the guests, yet he stopped again, withholding specifics. The cameraman zoomed closer, the red tally light gleaming. Into his microphone, he said, "The seal is visible now." And it was. For the first time, she tilted the portfolio forward, exposing the golden emblem fully to the entire room. Gasps broke out like glass shattering. One guest cried out, "That is impossible. That seal belongs only to the consortium." Another countered, "Then how is it in her hand?" The room fractured further, alliances shifting, certainty collapsing. Richard's voice cracked. "Seals can be forged. Words can be rehearsed. This is nothing but deception." But sweat streaked his brow, and his hand gripped the edge of the table as though it were the last barrier holding him up. She answered, her tone sharp as glass. "Deception does not carry signatures carved in ink, nor does it command silence from those who know the truth." The young waiter dropped a glass. It shattered across the marble. The sound cut through the whispers. His eyes locked on hers, wide, trembling, yet filled with recognition. He opened his mouth, but only a single syllable escaped before fear swallowed it. The crowd leaned forward, desperate, restless. The ballroom had become a crucible of truth, and every second delayed burned hotter. She closed the portfolio once more, denying them all the answers they craved. Her silence now was not passive. It was power, and the night was far from finished. The shatter of glass still echoed when the young waiter stepped forward, his tray abandoned on a side table. His hands trembled, but his voice finally rose above the clamor. "Her name is Carter," he declared, louder this time, clear enough for every guest to hear. The room erupted. Some gasped, others scoffed. Phones tilted closer, catching his every word. Richard Hale spun toward the boy, fury blazing. "Silence! You know nothing of this!" But the authority in his voice was gone, drowned beneath the murmur of recognition rippling across the hall. The masked guest seized the moment. He removed his mask slowly, his gaze locked on the portfolio. "Carter," he said with certainty, "I remember now. 5 years ago, at the consortium meeting. That seal was on the very contracts that secured billions in global assets." His admission cracked the room open. Doubt spread like wildfire, but so did belief. Richard's hand shook as he slammed it against the railing. "Lies. All of it. None of this proves her power. You are all being deceived." His shout broke into a cough, his strength faltering in front of the cameras and the crowd. She did not flinch. The black woman raised the crimson portfolio once more, tilting it enough for the bold heading to show again. This time, a fragment of the first page was visible, an opening line that read, "Consortium investment allocation, 10 billion United States dollars. Gasps turned into shouts. Some guests surged forward to see, while others stepped back in fear of the truth unraveling before them. She closed it again. 1 second of revelation, then silence. She spoke only one sentence. "You asked for proof. It is coming." The cameraman's lens tightened on her face, capturing the composure in her eyes. Into his microphone he repeated, "The world is watching." The crowd believed it now. They knew this was no longer private humiliation. It was public reckoning. Richard Hale, pale and sweating, collapsed back against the staircase railing. His lips trembled with rage, but his words carried no weight. The power was slipping from him with every second. And still, she had not revealed everything. The air felt suspended, as if the next word, the next gesture, could decide the fate of every person in the room. The name did not vanish. It rang in the air like the toll of a great bell. Carter. Guests repeated it, some in disbelief, others in awe. Phones rose higher, capturing not just her face, but the unraveling of Richard Hale's composure. Richard descended a step, his tuxedo disheveled, his fingers stabbing like a spear. "Do not be fooled by a name," he shouted, voice breaking. "She clings to words she does not own. She has no right to be here, no right to carry that portfolio. This is spectacle, nothing more. She insults all of us." His spit carried across the air, venom dressed as certainty. Yet certainty no longer belonged to him. The young black woman did not flinch. She placed the crimson portfolio against the edge of the table, her gloved hand still firm on its cover. The golden seal caught the chandelier's light once more, glaring like proof carved in fire. Then, slowly, deliberately, she slid one page half out. Gasps erupted. It was not just a seal. The document bore signatures, lines of ink unmistakably attached to names whispered with reverence across boardrooms, banking dynasties, technology magnates, even the name of a senator whose policies had built empires. For one breathless moment, the names blazed in the open. Then, with a precise motion, she covered them again. The room fractured. Some surged forward, desperate to confirm what they saw. Others recoiled, unwilling to accept that the hierarchy they trusted was crumbling before their eyes. "That cannot be real," one man hissed. "But I saw the senator's name," another countered. Every whisper was an ember, igniting chaos. Richard's face drained of color. Desperation gripped him. He lunged toward the portfolio, his hand clawing through the air. But before his fingers could reach, one of the security guards caught his wrist. The crack of resistance shocked the room. Richard froze, staring at the very man paid to enforce his will. The guard's grip was firm, his eyes uncertain but unyielding. Loyalties were no longer absolute. The masked guest lowered his glass, stepping forward, his voice cut through the noise, calm but unbreakable. "I told you," he said, eyes locked on the crimson folder. "That seal is no forgery. I was present when those signatures were placed. If she carries this, her presence is not intrusion, it is ownership." The word detonated. Ownership. The guests shifted, no longer sneering but calculating. The power in the room was tilting, invisible but undeniable. Richard roared back, his voice shredded by panic. "Ownership? She cannot comprehend what she pretends to hold. You are all blind. This is manipulation." His fist shook, but his eyes betrayed him. Fear, raw and unmasked, had entered. The cameraman leaned closer, the red tally light glowing, his voice recorded in every frame. "The world is watching the unraveling of a lie." And then she spoke. Her voice was not raised, but it pierced every ear. "You tried to erase me, but you cannot erase $10 billion. The silence that followed was deeper than any shout. Guests tightened their grip on their phones. Some gasped. Others stared as though witnessing history itself. Richard stumbled back a step, the railing behind him suddenly necessary to hold his weight. But she did not open the portfolio fully. The proof, the final undeniable proof, remained sealed. The battle was only beginning. On the ring, the word ownership had detonated, and its echo refused to fade. Guests who once smirked now looked at one another with sharpened suspicion. The chandeliers above flickered in their brilliance, but the true light came from the dozens of phones capturing every frame of the unraveling. Richard Hale clung to the railing, his voice trembling. "You are all fools. A name on a page means nothing without authority. This is an illusion." Yet even as he spoke, the guard who had seized his wrist stepped back beside the black woman, not him. The shift was visible. Power was leaving his side. The masked guest spoke again, his voice resonant. "I was there when the ink dried. If this portfolio is here tonight, then so is the consortium's weight. $10 billion does not travel without purpose." Murmurs ignited. Guests whispered fiercely. 10 billion? Is that the scale of it? The ballroom was no longer a celebration. It had become a tribunal. The black woman finally moved. She opened the portfolio halfway, just long enough for the nearest rows to glimpse a document titled in bold, "Consortium Expansion Allocation, 10 billion United States dollars. Beneath the heading, paragraphs of strategy blurred by distance. But at the bottom, signatures gleamed enough to prove this was no theater. Then, as quickly as it opened, she closed it again. Shouts erupted. Some demanded to see more. Others shouted in defense of her right to withhold it. The division cracked wide, half the ballroom now watching her as if she were the rightful host, the other half clinging to Richard's unraveling authority. Richard roared back, desperate. You think paper makes her sovereign? It means nothing if she cannot act upon it. But his words fell weaker than before, drowned by the weight of what had been seen. The young waiter, still trembling beside broken glass, spoke again, louder. I served at the consortium's gala last year. I saw her name on the guest ledger. She was there, seated at the head table. His confession shocked the room. Witness had become testimony. Phone swung toward him, recording. The cameraman pivoted as well, his voice steady. The truth is multiplying. For the first time, Richard Hale looked cornered, surrounded not by guards, but by truth. His hands shook, his voice faltered. This is still not final. How 10? The black woman lifted her chin, her words cutting the air clean. Final comes when I choose, and not a moment sooner. The crowd leaned forward. They were no longer spectators, they were jurors, bound to the next revelation. And the portfolio remained sealed once more. How 10? The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a trial chamber, with chandeliers as spotlights, and every guest a juror holding a silent verdict. Phones recorded from every angle, their cold lights burning brighter than the chandeliers themselves. Richard Hale staggered forward, his tuxedo undone at the collar, sweat streaking his temples. His voice carried desperation dressed in rage. Do not believe this charade. These are fragments of paper, waved like theater props. She shows you glimpses because she knows the truth cannot survive the light of full exposure. But his words no longer commanded. Guests murmured back, louder than his roar. We saw the signatures. She carries the seal. The waiter confirmed her name. His denials collapsed beneath the weight of evidence already seen. The black woman, Carter, did not raise her voice. She let silence surround her until the guests themselves quieted. Then she spoke, low and steady. You want light? Then let it burn. She opened the portfolio again, farther this time. The pages spread enough to reveal bold paragraphs of allocation. Investments mapped to global industries, partnerships tied to corporations in the very room, and at the bottom, a familiar name inked in black. Richard Hale. The gasp that followed was tidal. Guests recoiled, some in shock, others with grim recognition. For years, they had believed Richard Hale was a figurehead of independence, a man who controlled this stage. Now, his signature on the consortium's ledger screamed otherwise. Cameras zoomed closer. The cameraman's voice rang steady. His name is on her documents. Richard lunged again, but not for her. He grasped at the papers, his hand desperate to tear them free. One guard stepped between them, blocking him firmly. The crack of leather shoes against marble echoed as the guard planted himself at her side. You forged this! Richard shrieked. His face was crimson, veins swelling in his temples. My name has been stolen! You believe a thief over me? But the masked guest answered, voice even and relentless. I sat at that boardroom table. I watched you sign. And I watched her receive the portfolio. You cannot erase what I witnessed. The crowd erupted, no longer whispers but open debate. Some shouted for Richard's resignation from his own stage. Others demanded Carter reveal every page. Phones swung like spotlights between them, amplifying every tremor of truth. Carter did not rush. She closed the folder once more, her hand steady as iron. The truth does not need to scream. It only needs to stand. Her gaze fixed on Richard, and the hall felt like it bowed beneath the weight of her composure. Richard trembled, clutching the railing like a drowning man reaching for driftwood. His words, once a weapon, now cracked like brittle glass. This does not end here, he stammered. Carter's reply was colder than silence. No, it ends when I say it does. The room froze. Guests leaned forward as though pulled by a single thread. Even the music, long silenced, dared not return. The night had become hers. But the portfolio remained closed again, hiding what had not yet been revealed. The most devastating truth was still waiting. The chandeliers above trembled in their brilliance, as though even the light itself recoiled from what was unfolding. Phones remained raised like a jury of 1,000 unblinking eyes. Richard Hale clung to the railing, his breath ragged, his eyes wild. You think this ends because of a signature? You think you can erase me with ink on a page? His voice cracked, more plea than power. Carter did not flinch. She lifted the crimson portfolio with both hands this time, opening it wider. Pages rustled, alive with authority. The document inside bore not just the seal but a highlighted clause, bold as a verdict. Oversight of consortium operations transferred to Executive Director Carter, effective immediately. The room erupted. Some shouted, others gasped, many simply froze. The truth was no longer rumor or half-revealed glimpses. It was declaration. It was binding. The cameraman's lens tightened, his voice clear into the microphone. She is not a guest. She is the director. Richard lunged, but his knees buckled. He collapsed against the marble, hands trembling. No, this cannot be. They would never give it to you. They would never. His words died under the weight of the very ink he had once endorsed. The masked guest stepped closer, unmasked now, his tone sharp as judgment. I witnessed the vote. I witnessed the transfer. And you knew. You sat in that meeting, Richard. You signed it yourself. The silence that followed was heavier than his roars. Guests leaned away from him, some shaking their heads, others muttering bitterly. His credibility was ash, scattered under the golden light. Carter closed the portfolio slowly, deliberately. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. You tried to make me invisible. Tonight, I remind you that I am inevitable. The room bowed to her composure. Richard trembled at her words. A man dismantled in front of the very audience that once cheered him. But she had not turned the final page. The truth was not yet complete. The ballroom had become a crucible of silence, every guest frozen in anticipation. Richard Hale lay slumped against the marble railing, his tuxedo wrinkled, his face pale and glistening with sweat. He no longer looked like a master of ceremonies, but a man stripped bare by truth. Carter stood at the center, the crimson portfolio in her hands. She lifted it high enough for all cameras to capture, then opened it fully for the first time. Pages spilled like a tide of evidence, each one stamped with the golden seal. The first was the allocation plan, mapping $10 billion across industries and continents. The second bore the signatures of dynasties, magnates, and lawmakers. The third, the clause transferring authority to her, Executive Director Carter. And the final page carried Richard Hale's own signature, his name tethered to every decision he now denied. The guests gasped in unison. The fragments they had glimpsed across the night now connected into a complete picture. The waiter's whispered name, the masked guest's testimony, the cameraman's whispers into his microphone, the seal, the signatures, the strategy, all threads woven into one undeniable tapestry. The cameraman's voice rose, unwavering. The world has its proof. Tonight, history is live. Richard pushed himself upright, his knees trembling. You do not understand, he rasped, voice broken. They will not follow you. They cannot. But the masked guest cut him off, sharp and certain. They already have. You signed the transfer yourself. You surrendered authority, and now you face the consequence. The crowd erupted. Some shouted her name, others filmed feverishly, broadcasting every second beyond the walls. The chandeliers gleamed as though honoring the moment. Carter closed the portfolio gently, her composure unshaken. She stepped forward, her voice calm but resonant, each word etched into marble and memory. You tried to strip me of presence. You tried to silence my name. But tonight, I remind you, dignity cannot be denied, and truth cannot be erased. Her gaze swept the hall, meeting the eyes of those who had mocked her, doubted her, sneered at her. None could hold her stare now. Even the guards stood at her side, no longer tools of removal but symbols of allegiance. Richard collapsed back against the railing, defeated, his voice gone. He was no longer the host, no longer the authority. He was a relic, exposed under the brightest light. Carter turned toward the guests, raising the portfolio one last time. This is not only about me, it is about every door that was closed, every voice that was dismissed, every name that was erased. Tonight we open the door, and it will never close again. Applause broke like thunder, phones capturing the roar, sending it into the world. The trial of the ballroom was over. The verdict was written in $10 billion, in signatures carved in ink, and in the unshakable resolve of one woman who refused to disappear.